What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our team mini series where we go over the individual players for each team. Today, we're focusing on the Los Angeles Chargers. They finished last in their division last year. Obviously, their division counterparts, the Kansas City Chiefs, took home the Super Bowl trophy. The Broncos and the Raiders and the Chargers are all improved this year. It's going to be a pretty fun division to watch overall. But let's break down their individual fantasy relevant players, starting with their quarterback. Presumably it's Tyrod Taylor. They did draft Justin Herbert at 6th overall. He's definitely a guy that in your rookie drafts you want to go out and grab. One quarterback leagues, two quarterback leagues. I think he does have some long-term value. Not sure exactly if he's going to see any playing time this year, or if he does, it's not going to be too relevant. It really is all on Tyrod Taylor's shoulders too. If he comes out, because they do have a good defense, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. He has some weapons on offense, so he pretty much has to kind of stink the bed for him not to play. All he's got to do is take care of the football, which he notoriously has done over his years when he was with Buffalo, in Cleveland, and backing up in Baltimore. But I could see him having a stat line close to 3,000 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, which would be a career high as far as passing touchdowns goes. 7 interceptions. Like I said, he doesn't really turn the ball over too much. Another 4 touchdowns on the ground with 450 yards. About 303 fantasy points. So it's at the bottom or near the bottom of where my quarterbacks are. There's only a couple that I have below him. I have him above Sam Darnold. I have him above Ryan Fitzpatrick, Dwayne Haskins, guys like that. But he's got the weapons, so that's why I got him a little jump in the touchdowns. And this is all assuming that he plays 16 games.
Yeah, and number one, congratulations for not saying San Diego. I still hear a lot of people say the San Diego Chargers. Number two, you don't want to talk about Easton Stick?
No,
I mean, that's
Easton's,
a fantastic name.
That's a hockey player's name.
That's their third quarterback right now. But yeah, I mean, to start off with Justin Herbert, I'm not a big fan of his. I don't think that he's a franchise quarterback. If he does play, I actually think it helps Austin Eckler a little bit. Over 30% of his passes at Oregon were checkdowns to his running backs, and that's something he's going to have to work on because franchise guys don't just keep checking it down to their running backs. He has a big arm. He's got to learn to push the ball down the field, and I think that's one of his big weaknesses right now. But I think the only way really he plays this season is if the Chargers struggle. I mean, Tyrod's a solid option. There's no reason to rush Herbert. With Tyrod, I expect them to be in playoff contention. If the wheels start to fall off, then yeah, you'll probably see Herbert towards the end of the season because why not? They spent the 6th overall pick on him. And then kind of going into Tyrod, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I feel like we're all undervaluing him. As much as he is a game manager, we've said that several times about him. He doesn't have the biggest arm, and that's kind of the kind of quarterback he is. But when he was with the Bills, he had back-to-back seasons where he rushed for over 560 yards. And I mean, those are pretty big numbers. And from a fantasy standpoint, that could be extremely relevant if he has over 500 rushing yards. So I currently have him ranked around the same place as you do. I believe he's 25th or 26th for me. I don't have my exact rankings in front of me, but I think he has more potential than we're giving him credit for, though, just because of that rushing ability. So I would agree. I'd put him ahead of guys like Sam Darnold just because they don't have that ability. And Tyrod has a great group of weapons now. And one thing that we haven't really talked about as well is their offensive line was pitiful last year, and they made quite a few acquisitions this offseason, and actually it could be a really nice offensive line. They signed Brian Bulaga from the Packers, who's been a great left tackle, getting older, but he still has ability. Trey Turner they got from Carolina. They swapped him and Russell Okung. Trey Turner's made the Pro Bowl the past 5 seasons, so he's one of the best guards in the league. And then Mike Pouncey, who's a great center. He was with Miami. Had some injury problems last year, didn't really play, but he's a top 5 center in my opinion, who they have as well. So that offensive line can be sneaky good this year, and that's only going to help his case.
Yeah, they address the offensive line through trades and free agency, which they come in and are able to start right away as opposed to developing a guy, which might take a little bit of time. So they're not. I don't know if they're really in win now mode. There's really no pressure for them. They have the they don't really have a lot of I'm not making a joke about their fans, but they don't have a lot of following per se. They are opening up that new stadium with the Rams, and I think they'll be able to sell out some games. And Tyrod and Justin Herbert for years to come. Justin Herbert more so are gonna hopefully be able to sell out some games for them, but. They're not really like forced to do anything. They don't have to. I mean, every team wants to make the playoffs and make the Super Bowl and win, but it's not like they have to do that this year. So they could come in under the radar with. And we're going to talk about the defense. And there's a bunch of guys that I'd like to talk about on this defense. So the offense just has to put it together, which they have the talent to do it. We just got to see if they can make it happen.
Yeah, and they just gave Anthony Lynn an extension as well. There was a lot of talk that he was on his way out and this was going to be a new start to the franchise, but he's still their guy, so there is less pressure now with him with a longer term deal. He doesn't have to necessarily win now because they have faith that he's going to be part of their rebuild.
Yeah, and they also have a little bit of leeway in that division too with the reigning Super Bowl champs and just kind of running all over, or passing all over everybody, I should say. But kind of got a little bit of leeway there, being in that same division with them. Moving on to the running backs, there's three relevant ones that I could see. Now, you don't really want to when you talk about running backs in fantasy football, you kind of want to break it down just a one guy. But there's three here that realistically should and could be drafted. Austin Eckler is obviously your top guy here. He's going in the first 2, 3, 4 rounds, and for good reason. We saw what he could do without Melvin Gordon last year on the field. The rushing numbers weren't exactly there all the way, but he did a lot in the passing game. And then even more when Melvin Gordon came back, he was primarily more of a pass catcher, where the first 8 games of the season he was running the ball a little bit. And I think that's going to get better. I think he'll still get his most of his value is going to be in the passing game, but I think he's going to be a little bit better of a runner, but he's not going to be the main runner. They got Justin Jackson and they went out and drafted Joshua Kelly too. Any one of those three guys really could be the lead back by the end of the year. I think you're going to get more points out of Eckler with the receiving upside he has though.
Yeah, and I don't really know why, but a lot of people are hating on Austin Eckler. He's currently the 12th running back off the board in PPR leagues. That seems pretty steep. But, I mean, he was 8th last season, and he had some huge weeks. And when Melvin Gordon came back, his production really didn't go down. I mean, they were both on the field the majority of the time. And, I mean, he had 92 receptions. And if you're talking, even if he goes down to 70 this season, I mean, he's still a top 15 back. So I think he's a really safe option, in my opinion. A lot of people don't see it that way, but he's the most explosive player they have on offense right now. I love Keenan Allen, but he's just not an explosive kind of player. Eckler is speedy, he's shifty, and he's going to be involved in that offense. A lot of people say, oh, Tyrod doesn't check down to his running backs. I mean, Austin Eckler, you're not checking it down to him. He is out there running routes. I mean, he's essentially another wide receiver on the field. So I don't think it's out of the realm. People, it's one of those things. I mentioned it with Lamar Jackson the one day. People say, oh, Austin Eckler has to regress. But I don't see why he has to. He has to be involved in this offense for them to move the ball because he's the most explosive player that they have. Will he have 92 receptions again? I mean, I won't necessarily say that, but should he be in the 80s? I think so, and I don't think there's any reason he can't be. In terms of their other two guys, one of these two guys, I don't know who yet, one of these two guys is going to be involved. I mean, Melvin Gordon was on the field right around 60% of the snaps last year. I mean, those are going to somebody, and I don't think it's going to be Austin Eckler. That's just not who Austin Eckler is. He's a complimentary back. I like Justin Jackson a lot. He had a really nice career at Northwestern. He was very explosive. In the limited amount of carries he's had in the NFL, he's already averaged over 5.5 yards a carry. So I think he has an ability to be super explosive. It's just a matter if he can stay on the field. Same with Josh Kelly. Nice career at UCLA. I think he's a better complement to Austin Eckler. You can argue Justin Jackson and Austin Eckler are similar explosive players. So it'll be interesting to see how this dynamic shakes out. Overall, though, I think Austin Eckler, very safe pick. Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly are both guys that are going within the last 2 or 3 rounds. And you could potentially be getting an RB2, which might seem extreme to say, but that's what Melvin Gordon was last season. So if one of those two guys is able to see that volume, they're a steal that late in the draft. And like I said, it's hard to say at this point who it's going to be, but I'd take a chance. I'd draft both of them with 2 of my last 3 picks, honestly, and I think one of them is going to be relevant and has a huge upside.
Yeah, and just circling back to Austin Eckler too, a couple more points I wanted to make is I think he actually gets a little bit of a boost for two different reasons. One is because he doesn't have the threat of Melvin Gordon coming back and ending his holdout. It's the same thing that we saw, excuse me, a couple of years ago with James Conner and Le'Veon Bell. We didn't know, like every single week it was like, is Le'Veon Bell coming back? All James Conner owners were like biting their fingernails, wondering if they're going to be losing their running back one. Um, Same thing here now. You don't have Austin Eckler doesn't have the threat of Melvin Gordon coming back, and the other thing is Philip Rivers, as much as he's had Ladainian Tomlinson at his arsenal, Austin Eckler last year at his arsenal, he's not a I don't even want to call it a check down. He's not a guy that really throws it to his running back. And I noticed that a lot last year, especially because I had Austin Eckler. It was like Austin Eckler is wide open in the flats, and Philip Rivers is looking to chuck it downfield. Tyrod and Justin Herbert are gonna not necessarily check it down, like I said, but they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be looking to chuck it 60 yards downfield every
Yeah.
single play like Philip Rivers was. So I think it's a boost for him there. He might get more looks that way. Moving on to the wide receivers, they got two of the I don't want to say better ones, one of the better ones, and then one up and coming one, and then it's kind of weak after that. There's a late round guy that they picked up, KJ Hill, in the seventh round this past draft. That he has an opportunity, especially with after Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. It's really not that strong, so he has a chance to make the roster and get on the field a little bit, maybe be a taxi squad player for you for at least a year or two. But the main two are Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Keenan Allen is one of the best route runners in the league. He's going to be able to help out any quarterback that's there under center. Justin Herbert, Tyrod Taylor. If he could get open, which his feet will allow him to do so, he's going to catch a lot of footballs. And then Mike Williams is their big guy. He's 2 years removed from having double-digit touchdowns. And then last year he kind of regressed a little bit, but he still put up a quiet year. He's a big red zone threat. He's probably even over their tight ends. I think he's the biggest red zone threat that they got on the team.
Yeah, and you already mentioned Keenan Allen's probably a top 5 route runner in the NFL. And man, the hate in the fantasy community for Keenan Allen is so real this offseason. And to me, it's bizarre. And you kind of touched on this a little bit with Tyrod, but Tyrod prefers receivers who run short to intermediate routes. And that's exactly what Keenan Allen does. I mean, this is exactly the kind of wide receiver that Tyrod's going to target. And Keenan Allen gets himself open. Currently, according to fantasydata.com, he's going wide receiver 21. I've seen him go even lower than that, though. And it seems like he's going in the 5th or 6th round, and he just keeps slipping. And as we get closer and closer to draft season in PPR leagues, I mean, I think he's a steal. Over
Yep.
the past 3 years, he finished as the 3rd best wide receiver, 12th best, and 6th. And I mean, so you're getting him, even if he's the 21st wide receiver off the board, to me, at the worst, he's a top 15 option. You know, you could say Philip Rivers liked to sling it around a little more, so maybe he's not that top 12 option he was before, but I just don't see him slipping into the 20s. I think his volume's going to be too high. He's still their number one wide receiver, and I personally think it's insane, and I think he offers some nice value right now. In terms of Mike Williams, kind of the same thing. I mean, I don't think Tyrod's style fits Mike Williams. He's a big guy that likes to stretch the field. He quietly, and you kind of mentioned it, he had over 1,000 yards last season. He had 1,001 yard last season on 49 receptions. So I mean, he averages a ton per catch. You know, he's a high efficiency player that, you know, he's the kind of guy who runs a fly route 20, 30, 40 yards down the field, and you might see he has 2 catches for 70 yards on the day. I mean, those are the kind of stat lines he puts up. He is a big guy, so he is a red zone target. I would probably say Hunter Henry will outscore him in terms of touchdowns. I think he's a big red zone threat as well, but Mike Williams currently going as the 58th wide receiver off the board, and that's pretty low for a guy that just had over 1,000 yards. And I
Yeah.
don't know if a lot of people realize he had over 1,000 yards, even though it's only 1 yard over 1,000, it still counts. And but I understand at the same time. I think his upside's capped because Tyrod doesn't like to throw those 40, 50-yard bombs. So we'll see how it turns out. I think at 58, he's definitely worth that shot, though, because he's been talented. You know, I remember watching him at Clemson, and he's a very talented receiver. In terms of those two other young guys, we'll kind of see how it shakes out. Everybody thought KJ Hill was going to go a lot earlier, but they actually took Joe Reed a few rounds earlier. So to me, that shows that they value Joe Reed a little higher, even though people aren't talking about him. I think both of them are guys you just stash on your taxi squad right now. Not really any redraft relevance. If either of them do emerge, they're interesting PPR stashes. But as of right now, I think those two guys are going to be fighting for slot work.
And what do you think is keeping is bringing Keenan Allen down in the draft stock more? Do you think it's his injury history, or do you think it's his quarterback?
I think it's solely the quarterback because he's been healthy the past few seasons now.
He
So,
has, but when you look at his name, I mean, not us, but like when just casual fantasy players look at his name, they're like, "Oh, he's been hurt a lot. I'm not going to touch him." And that's like, without going onto the computer and looking up history or anything like that, they're just going to assume that Keenan Allen is injury prone because of a couple of years ago, and not because the past couple of years he's been healthy.
yeah, I mean, he definitely has that reputation, but for me, it's solely the quarterback play. I mean, even when we talk about Tyrod, I think we discount in saying he's a game manager. He is, but he's very accurate and a solid QB. And I think Philip Rivers has, I don't want to say legendary status, but he's one of the better quarterbacks of this generation. So when people say, oh, we're going from Philip Rivers, who's a legend of this generation, to Tyrod Taylor, I think that's very underwhelming for people.
All right, going on to the tight ends. Hunter Henry is their top dog there. They still got Virgil Green, and not anybody to write home about. I just want to mention his name because we did cover XFL for the couple weeks that it was here. Donald Parham they ended up bringing in,
Mhm.
but Hunter Henry obviously is the top guy there. He could be a Tyrod Taylor favorite. Virgil Green, he has shown some pass catching ability throughout his years in with the Chargers back in Denver. He's pretty much he's like the perfect tight end two for a team. I don't think he's really good enough to be a starter. If Hunter Henry goes down, he could be a good flyer. But Hunter Henry, he's the main guy there. He's going to be like they got four really good pass catching options between Eckler, Henry, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen. So that just helps out Tyrod, and I think Hunter Henry is going to have a really good year this year.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Donald Parham. I think he's actually a really interesting name. I mean, we saw what he did in the XFL. He was the best tight end in the league, and I would argue he was the best pass catcher in the entire league. And he really wasn't your traditional tight end. He lined up in the slot. He moved all over the field. So sneaky enough, we were just talking about Joe Reed and KJ Hill. We could see Donald Parham take on a slot role. I mean, he's a bigger guy, but he did it in the XFL, so I'm not necessarily drafting him. If you're in a super, 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 super deep league, I may consider stashing him if you have a big taxi squad.
How many
That doesn't.
supers is that?
I mean, there was a lot of super. I like him though. I remember watching him, and there were some guys in the XFL. You just watched them, and you said, okay, like they should be in the NFL. And he
Cam
was one of the
Phillips.
Cam Phillips was good as well. He reminds me a little bit, I guess, of Mike Williams, just more of a downfield threat. But Donald Parham, I think, could make a name for himself, and even if he proves it a little bit here with the Chargers, he could move on and start somewhere else potentially. But let's move on to Hunter Henry, who's more relevant here. And I think Hunter Henry is actually super underrated. He averaged the eighth most fantasy points last year, and he was the ninth tight end overall, only playing 12 games. So that's pretty impressive. And one of the things I really like about him is Tyrod Taylor really favored his tight ends when he was a starter in Buffalo. So in 2016, his better year, Charles Clay led the Bills in targets. It was only 87, but still, he favored throwing to the tight end. And I could see Hunter Henry becoming that security blanket for Tyrod. So I think Hunter Henry is a very safe pick at tight end. We talk about all these younger guys who have a ton of upside, and I think Hunter Henry is. I don't want to say guaranteed, but I think he's guaranteed as long as he plays a full season to be a top 10 guy. He has nice red zone upside, and I could see Tyrod heavily targeting him.
All right, so we're running a little longer than a lot of our other shows have ran, but we still got to get through the kicker and the defense here. Michael Badgley is their kicker, really really good kicker. He's got a strong leg on him. In the new stadium, which is I believe it's a retractable roof, so and plus it's also really good weather out there in LA, so not a lot of wind concerns. Plus Vegas now has their new stadium, so it's an additional one game that he gets to play in a dome. So it's up to, I mean, not up to it. It's at least 9 games in either really good weather or dome that you get Michael Badgley. So that's a good kicker, I think, to grab this year.
Yep, he's very accurate, has a good leg. the offense, I could see them potentially struggling a little bit to move the ball consistently, so he may have a lot of opportunity there. But yeah, I mean he's a nice kicker. I'd have him in my top 10.
Oh, and don't forget about that one game that they have in Denver where the air is thin, so balls travel further up there too. So that's 10 games that you got out of Badgley in good kicking weather. On their defense, like I said, there's quite a few players here. I'll just name some players if you want to point any out, just to save some time. You can talk about some stats, but I'll just name the players that I like. Melvin Ingram is one of them. Nick Vigil, another one that came over from Cincinnati. Their first round, one of their first round picks, Kenneth Murray, the linebacker, and then Derwin James. I've mentioned it in many episodes that I don't really like grabbing defensive backs, but a safety that could get a lot of tackles. That's Derwin James. He missed a lot of last year with an injury. I think he missed the whole year actually with an injury. They ended up getting Chris Harris over from Denver, the cornerback. So if you have to play a cornerback, him and Casey Hayward are both viable options there. And if you have to play a defensive lineman, Joey Bosa is obviously he's a top notch player. So I mean, I just named about 6, 7 starters off this Chargers defense. So I mean, overall the defense is good. Their kick returner is one of their backup cornerbacks, Desmond King. So you get points there too. But this is a top 5 defense to me. Fantasy wise, I think they're going to keep them in a lot of games, allow the offense to put some points up on the board, and then IDPs, they're just loaded with them.
Yeah, one thing to watch out for is Joe Reed, who they just drafted, and I mentioned in the wide receiver part of this. He returned kicks in college and was really effective, so you might see him return some kicks, and if so, that could up his value a little bit depending on what kind of league you play in. I mean, I love Joey Bosa. He's one of the premier pass rushers in this league. He's going to be a top 5 guy for years to come. Kenneth Murray's been going around the 15th to 20th linebacker, more towards 20th in a lot of IDP leagues I've been in. I mean, I think he has the chance to have a ton of volume. He's going to be their starting middle linebacker. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a top 10 IDP finish this season. Same with Derwin James. I mean, I think he's one of the top 5 safeties in the league just based off of his rookie season. In his rookie season alone, he had 105 tackles, and that's very impressive from the safety position. And I think he's only going to continue to improve. Melvin Ingram, same thing, very consistent pass rusher, a great option if you have to play a defensive lineman. Their corners, I'm not touching them. I would be between them and the Dolphins for the best corner duo in the league. Casey Hayward is one of the most underrated corners in all of football. So, yeah, I mean, I really like their defensive front. A lot of youth too, so a lot of things to be excited for.
All right, so that's it for the Chargers. Final thoughts on them. I think they have overall. I think they have a solid team. Unfortunately they're in a division where they have the best team in the league playing in their division, so I don't see them grabbing the division title. I've been talking about it with a couple of the guys in our group chat, and I might have even mentioned it on a couple other podcasts, that I think the AFC West is going to be one of the stronger divisions. You got the Broncos, the Raiders, and the Chargers that are all improving, all with like just quarterbacks with either something to prove or young quarterbacks like Drew Lock. I think that we could realistically see a team like the Chiefs go 13-3, 12-4, and then 3-9-7 teams, with one of these teams slipping into as the seventh team for the wild card.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that every team in this division has the ability to have a winning record. I have the Chargers in second place in that division right now and snagging a wild card just because I really like their defense. I think it could be top 5 this season. Their offensive line, I really like what they did with it. I think it's much improved. And I think Tyrod's the kind of guy, and I think this team right now kind of needs this. He's not going to make mistakes that are going to lose you games. And with that defense, that offensive line, they have a few nice weapons on offense. I think they're an underdog candidate to make the playoffs. And I mean, they did 2 years ago. I mean, we saw them shut down a rookie Lamar Jackson. So that defense is only going to keep improving, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were a wild card team this year.
All right, so until the next time, we'll see you guys.